Women are powerful creators. The Align Women podcast features female entrepreneurs, leaders, and other professional women who've demonstrated agency and innovation in their personal and professional lives. I'm your host, Amy Evans. I have authentic, intimate conversations with my guests that highlight their paths to success, their struggles and accomplishments, and the things that currently excite, motivate, and inspire them to turn their visions into reality. Welcome to the Align Women podcast. I'm Amy Evans, your host and the founder of Align Women, a leadership and networking organization for professional women. This podcast features female leaders, entrepreneurs, and other inspirational women who've demonstrated agency and innovation in their personal and professional lives. And with me today is Sally Helgesen. She is the world's premier expert on women's leadership, according to Forbes. She's a best-selling author, a speaker, and a leadership coach. I learned about Sally last year when one of my former podcast guests, Patricia Griffey, recommended her book, How Women Rise. I've read the book twice, and it has had a huge impact on me. And I'm so excited to have Sally on the podcast to talk about that book and find out what she's working on now. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you, Amy. It's wonderful to be here with you.
I'm so excited to talk with you about this book, which, like I said, has had such a huge impact on me. And I've had many opportunities to share the book with women in my circle. And I always recommend that they look just at the chapter titles and see how many of the 12 habits you talk about they identify with. And the experience of watching them do that is so much fun because so many of them identify with so many of the habits. And so for those who aren't familiar with the book, can you give a summary of what it's about?
Certainly, Amy. How Women Rise is really about the habits and behaviors that are most likely to get in the way of successful women and hold them back as they seek to move to a higher level. The model really comes from Marshall Goldsmith's wonderful book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is about the habits that get in the way of successful people. And I thought Marshall had a brilliant insight, which is that the same habits that can help you early in your career can hold you back as you move to a higher level, and yet you remain loyal to them because you know that they got you where you are. So I thought it was a great model. However, most of Marshall's coaching base, which he drew from, it's about 85% men. Mm-hmm. And I felt that a lot of the habits that I saw in my work for 30 years now that were problematic for women were not in there, and that he was focused on things that aren't much of a problem for women, such as learn to apologize, or don't always talk about how great you are, or don't feel like you have to win every time. So I suggested to him that we collaborate, and How Women Rise is the result of that collaboration. It's a lot of his coaching insights combined with what I learned in, as I said, 30 years of working with women leaders around the world.
And we'll talk about a couple of those habits. One of the things I really like is you include what I think of as two different types of habits. Some of them are things that women are traditionally socialized to do. Apologize, like you mentioned, be very agreeable, be very compliant. And then others are things that would fall under the category you were talking about of habits that we learn early in our careers that help us to be successful and then sort of run out their usefulness, and recognizing that we need to make that shift in order to rise in our careers is a really important pivot point. And I would say that things like minimizing and being likable and staying small would be those socializations. And then things like valuing expertise over moving forward in your career, or being so focused on your job that you're not laying the groundwork for moving ahead would be things that we might have learned early that keep us from moving forward.
Well, that's exactly true. And one of the habits we have in there, which we call the perfection trap, is a classic example of that. Research shows that women tend to be rewarded and promoted based on being perceived of as precise and correct, whereas men are more likely to be rewarded and promoted based on the perception that they're big picture thinkers and their connections and visibility. So being precise and correct and trying to make sure everything you do is perfect really can serve women very well. But when you move to a leadership position, it's a toxic habit. It makes it tough to delegate. You create a lot of stress for yourself. You create a lot of stress for other people by your perfectionistic demands. And it's not what organizations are looking for. In a more senior role, it's more likely to be outward facing. So they want some visibility, and they want that perception that you're a strategic thinker. And if you're a perfectionist, you're sort of identifying yourself as a small picture thinker.
I so identified with that, having been even in my school years, from very early on all the way through college, the straight A student and the teacher's pet, and realizing how much I need to let that go was one of the light bulb moments I had reading your book. I want to talk about a few of the things that stood out for me. I highly recommend reading and rereading the book. But a few things that really resonated with me. One of them is leverage, and one of the habits you talk about is that women are very good at building relationships. We're known as connectors and nurturers, but we're not so good at leveraging relationships. And that influenced me to choose leverage as one of my words for 2021, and as a leader of women's masterminds, and as I don't think you can be a self-proclaimed super connector, but I've had other people say that of me, so I'll accept that. Leveraging relationships is hugely important to me. I find, and I'm really curious if you've found this, that even the word leverage causes a lot of women to get their backs up. And when I have claimed that leverage is one of my words for 2021, I have women respond in a curious, if not negative way to that word. So in the book, you talk about leverage as, you describe it as investing in the mutuality of the relationship. And I think that's such a beautiful way to explain it. So I'd love to hear you talk about what leverage means from that perspective.
Well, certainly, Amy, and you're so right. And I still get that. I've gotten it ever since I kind of came up with that concept about that women invest more in building and less in leveraging relationships. But what I hear when I use that word is women say, well, I don't want to be a user. I don't want people to think that I don't value them as friends. And so it's putting it in a real either or context. Either you're just friends, or you're some very kind of manipulative, transactional, you do this for me and I'll do this for you type of person, which actually research shows is a very ineffective form of leverage. What leverage really is at its best is it is making yourself available for other people to help them in their careers, even as you ask for help or explore ways that you can work together so that you can achieve your either tactical, that is job related, or strategic career related goals. So this can be asking for introductions. It can be asking small asks, the best way to approach this person who you're going to have a meeting with. Hey, I know you've got a good relationship with so-and-so. Is there anything I should be aware of going into this meeting? That's a form of leverage, because what you're doing is you're soliciting that person's help. Now, what's interesting is that people who are really good at this, and there are women who are excellent at it, usually, especially obviously in sales, et cetera. There are women who are excellent at it. They recognize that that as they become more successful, they are ever a more valuable resource for the people who know them. So in a way, they see, that person's kind of lucky that I asked them to help me on this, because now they've got the kind of relationship where they can feel free also to ask me. And this pretty much goes for your whole career. So it is the absolute essence of a win-win mindset. And I think that the two reasons women are often reluctant, one has to do with not necessarily seeing themselves as potentially really powerful and able to do favors for other people. So that makes them hold back. But it really diminishes the power we have. And my belief is, if we believe that our becoming more successful would be a good thing for the world, we want to pursue becoming more successful, because for most of us, the world would be a better place if we were in a better position. One other thing that I learned since I wrote the book was that I was reading some research about what makes people respond with a yes or a no to requests people make. And it said that the number one reason people help other people is that it makes them feel good about themselves. Mm-hmm. So I always say to women who are reluctant, why would you deprive someone of the opportunity to feel better about themselves? You can put it all in a very positive frame.
I love that. And I think that taps into something that's so deep. That was one of the things that really stood out to me about the chapter on leverage was you pointing out that that the discomfort with it partly stems from the belief that we don't have anything valuable to bring to the exchange. And that one really blew me away. Of all the pieces of the book, that one really got me to my bones. So I appreciate the way you frame it. And when you describe it, and when I try to describe it, there's a warmth to it. You described it as a win-win. And oftentimes I'm working with other trusted advisors where we have clients to serve. So I even describe it as a win-win-win, because it's for me, it's for them, and it's for the clients. There's a warmth to it that I think we're trying to bring to the word, where a lot of people have a reaction to it as if it's cold and calculating. And so we'll keep talking about it and see if we can shift the perception of that.
Yes.
Another piece that you talk about in the book is what you call hedges and fillers. And this is something that I think we're socialized to do in our communication. And you posted something on LinkedIn recently, and you have a wonderful LinkedIn feed that has very promoting ideas from you and from other people in your circle. I highly recommend you follow Sally on LinkedIn. And you talked about the hedges and fillers that we put into our communication. Talk a bit about that. Share a few of those, because I think that's a simple, not always easy, but a simple way to make a shift in communication to have a more powerful stance.
Well, Amy, you're exactly right. I mean, the communication behaviors in the book are the ones I recommend people start with, because so many people come up to me and they say, I have 10 of the habits. I don't know where to start. I say, start with whatever's easiest. And it's often the communication habits, because we can see them ourselves and we can ask other people to watch us and see them. So the hedges and fillers are a perfect example of how we weaken our communication by using words like, well, I just have one question, or this will only take a minute. So we're hedging already. I don't want to take up any of your valuable time with the idea I've been thinking about for the last 5 years. So you're going in, you're diminishing it already before you do it. Other, typical verbal fillers would be, or like, stuff like that. We've all sat in meetings and listened to people who use those, and it becomes almost hypnotic and we can't even hear what they're saying. Those are really bad habits. They also, I think, are highlighted now that we're doing our work virtually. I noticed that in colleagues who use a lot of fillers, that it really doesn't work with the intimacy of Zoom or another platform like this. It really shows it up and highlights it. So this is a good time to work on it. We also use them in email. Yes. I would love my email to have a filter that points out every time I use the word just, gives me a little ping, I just responding to your email. Why just? No, I'm responding to your email. So the more we can use real declarative sentences, the more we can be clear. And that's, I think people say, well, what are you trying to be tough? Are you trying to be strong? I'm trying to be clear. And what all these things do is muddy the water. And the most effective communicators, verbally or in writing, are those who are the clearest. And myself, in terms of my writing, I've been a professional writer for 50 years. And I have had the same goal since I started, being clear. and you note how these fillers take away from that. So I recommend for anybody who wants to work on something that's not, that, as you say, it's simple, it's not easy, but it's simple, is start watching them, start listening for them, start asking people, I'm going to be in this Zoom meeting. I've noticed that I use a lot of hedges and fillers. I say just a lot, or even like, I'm trying to get rid of that. Would you just notice? Let me know how I'm doing. And then you'll have somebody who's kind of got your back and is watching and can give you some feedback. That's a really helpful thing to do. And with your emails, just go over them. Once you've done them, read them through. Are there hedges? Are there fillers? Can this be stronger? Can it be tighter?
Yes. Email in particular, I love, because if you can resist hitting the send button and sit for a minute with it, I often go back and find those things and remove them. I also find I'm prone to over-explaining, which is one of the things that you talk about in the book. I'm sorry I can't attend that meeting because, and then I go into an explanation. I'm just allowed to say I can't attend that meeting. I don't need to go into the explanation.
Love to be there, can't do it. Sorry.
Can't do it. So email is a great way to start the process of reviewing your communication, because you can catch it and delete it. I love your idea of the filter. Maybe we need to talk to Microsoft about the female communication filter and put it in to remove all of those things.
That would be great. I like that idea. It's also, if you're in touch with the busy, I get a lot of emails, a lot. Yeah. And I have a habit when I open an email, if it's really long, I just put a star on it. I'll come back to that. Guess what? Often I don't. So you will make your emails more likely to be read if they're short. And you're exactly right. Those backgrounds, those fillers. Let me tell you how I came up with this idea. Now tell the person the idea, and then say, if you're interested, if you want to know how I came up with it, I'm glad to tell you, but get right to the point. It's much more effective.
So valuable. I'm going to move on from the book. As much as I would love to continue to talk with you about all of these things, there's so much good stuff in there. And I had such a delightful moment recently because I was reading an interview of you that you posted on LinkedIn. And one of the interesting questions that the interviewer asked you was, who are the authors? What are the books that you like to give as gifts the most often? And I was so delighted to see that you mentioned Pema Chodron. And she's been such an influence on me, such an amazing teacher. For those of you who don't know who she is an American Buddhist nun. She has tons of work available in books and on YouTube, lectures, sometimes just audio on YouTube that are just delightful to listen to. She's one of my favorite thinkers. And I am really curious to hear how she's influenced you. And I noticed when I was going through the second reading of How Women Rise, especially the concept of "oh well," which I'd love for you to talk about, seemed like a very Buddhist and a very Pema Chodron in particular concept to me.
Well, that is it. Oh well is, and I'll explain it in a moment. I think that I don't remember how I got introduced to Pema Chodron, and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her name, but I've read pretty much all of her books, and some of them I read over and over. I do about a half-hour morning reading to kind of ground me for the day, and she's one of the authors that I will often read over and over and over again. But in terms of the Buddhist aspect of the book, I think that's very influenced by Marshall. Marshall is a Buddhist. He's been a practicing Buddhist for 50 years or so. He's really quite knowledgeable about Buddhism. And so I've been influenced by his, let it go, let it go, let it go philosophy. And what I like about work like Pema Chodron is that she shows me how to let go, because it's easy to just say, let it go. But you need a practice for letting it go. And I think her emphasis that in meditation, when we're in a sitting meditation and we get used to letting our thoughts go, that makes it easier for us to let everything go. And that's what I have found as an intermittent meditator. I found it very, very helpful for me for letting go of worrying, letting go of trying to over control situations, of ruminating, of beating myself up mentally if I feel that I didn't do a perfect job in some situation. So I find that to be an extremely helpful concept.
And that's where the oh well comes in. So as in terms of practical tips in how women rise, tell us about oh well, which I adore.
Oh well is one of the most popular things in that book. Oh well originated. Marshall is really good at letting things go. Marshall and I were working down at his apartment in New York City. I live about 100 miles north. And he got a call. We rarely got calls while we were working. And I heard him. He said, "Oh, Dr. Kim, I forgot. I was supposed to call him at 2:00. Oh, okay. I forgot. I'll call him back." He hung up the phone. This was his assistant. He looked at me and he went, "Oh, well." And we moved on. And I'm thinking, really? Oh, well, because I knew who Dr. Kim was. He's the CEO of the World Bank. So I'm on the train going home and I thought, if I had missed a call with the CEO of the World Bank, I would be kicking myself for the next full year. There is no way I would have said, oh, well. And it just seemed shocking to me. And the next morning, I actually had something that I'd screwed up. It wasn't a nightmare, but it was definitely a screw up. I got a fact wrong in an article that had been published in a big site, heard about it about 7:00 in the morning. I started to hyperventilate and get all upset. And then I remembered the thing with Marshall and I printed out a sign and it was on my office wall for years. Well, 2 years since this happened. And it just said in the largest font I have, it said, oh, well, to try to remind myself. So I started saying, oh, well, oh, well, oh, well. I remedied what had happened. I was able to change what was out there on the website. It was not that big a deal. But I saw the power of it and I put it in the book. And I've gotten so much response from that over the years from women who've said that. And I think it's because with things like rumination and these more internal behaviors, you really need something that reminds you that you're doing it, that breaks the path that you're on. Mm-hmm. And a mantra, a little saying is very effective for doing that. It can really make that change. So one final thing I want to say on that I could talk about it for a half an hour, but I was doing a program at Google. This was one of my last in-person programs. And at the end, this woman came up to me and she said, my favorite thing in the book is, oh, well. She said, and I'm a real ruminator. So I have stickies all over my house that say, oh, well, oh, well, oh, well, to remind myself not to ruminate. She said, and the other day, my 3-year-old daughter was carrying a big bowl of yogurt into the kitchen and she tripped and it went all over the kitchen. She looked up at me and she went, oh, well. And she said, I realized she picked that up because she'd heard me say it so much. So this woman said, I feel like I was raising the next generation of confident women. And
for sure.
It was a great story to think of this little 3-year-old. So I love having that kind of impact.
So great. And you mentioned rumination, and that's one of the habits in the book that you talk about. And I certainly relate to that and the pattern interrupt. And it's such a simple way to do it and so powerful. Yeah. Tell me what you are working on now. I'm so excited to hear what you've been doing.
Well, I'm working on a couple of things. Of course, March is coming up, and this is always my busiest month. I have 9 days when I'm doing 2 programs because we can do them virtually.
Right.
So these are for companies and organizations all over the world because it's International Women's Day, week, and month. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing a lot of work virtually. I'm doing a lot of corporate and law firm and association programs, very, very, and business schools, very, very gratifying. So I'm doing that. I'm working on, you mentioned my LinkedIn newsletter. I'm working on developing a much more robust newsletter that I would be doing on a monthly basis with a big and aiming at a big circulation for impact that would have like a little $4 a month fee. And I'm very excited about that. That's a really different kind of venture for me. I'm working with a group that was originally in Dubai to develop a training and coaching program to certify people in training for How Women Rise, which is very exciting. It was set to launch in May of 2020, but it was going to be live. So they had to recalibrate the whole thing to deliver it virtually. And so I'm very excited about that. We'll probably launch the first week in June. And I'm thinking about a new book, which is in the very early stages, about how men and women can work together, moving out of the pandemic, moving out of this strange time, to build a more functional workplace together.
Oh, I love that. I am looking forward to that. Speaking of books, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, who wrote a book that had such an impact on me, about a book that's had an impact on you that you've read in the last year.
In the last year, I'd say, of books I hadn't read before, because I often reread books. One of the books I read almost every morning is The Tao of Power, the R.L. Wing translation of the I Ching. That's very, very helpful. There's a lot of functional stuff in there about letting go. But I'd say the two books in my field that had an influence on me this year were Rosebeth Moss Cantor's book, Think Outside the Building, which is about what she's learned about leadership through the advanced leaders program she's had at the Kennedy School, and what it takes to be an advanced leader, what the characteristics are. It's a wonderful book. It's just so rich in terms of practical advice, how to persuade different kinds of people who may be on the fence, people who are all in, people who are skeptics. It's really, really tactical and hands-on, as well as very inspiring about the people who've gone through that program. And then I also loved this book written by a male business professor, Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, called Why Are So Many Incompetent Men Leaders? And it is about what a poor job organizations do of identifying extremely overconfident men, and that they are the ones who are most likely to get into leadership positions because people think, well, he's really confident, so he's got to be a good leader. He says he can do this, so his self-belief is so strong, let's trust him. And then it blows up. And we've seen hundreds of instances of this at every level and in every sector. So it's that was a really excellent book. And what he says is that this penalizes women and it penalizes competent men. So I just found that a fascinating book.
That sounds fascinating. And speaking of women in leadership, I'm really curious, since you are a student of and a professor of women in leadership, who fascinates you right now? Which women in leadership do you have your eye on that you find are interesting to watch?
To me, the most interesting woman to watch on a day-by-day basis is Nancy Pelosi, hands down. Watching her boldness, her strategic sense, she's always a couple steps ahead of everybody. But one of the things I love about Nancy Pelosi, I read this interview with her, and I think this resonates for so many women. This interviewer, it was in a big political website or something. It was quite a long interview. And one of the things the interviewer said was, it's really fascinating to watch you manage this huge and fractious institution, the US Congress. And it must have been helpful to you growing up in your household with your father. Her father was a 6-term mayor of Baltimore and a big, ran essentially the Democratic machine in the state. And she said, that was helpful. She said, but really, the way I learned to manage this was that I had 5 children in 6 years. And I had to organize them, and I had to motivate them, and I had to create situations where they were able to get along or see their common interest. And I just loved how she talked about that, because so many women that I've worked with over the years feel that if they take time away from the workplace or focus for a couple of years on their children, that it's like time away from the work of being a leader. And what she was saying was the most important leadership lessons I have learned as one of the top women leaders, certainly in the United States in history, is from having had that experience of staying home for 5 or 6 years with 5 or 6 very young children. And I thought that that was really admirable, great role modeling, and I believe it too. I think it's true, and it should give women more confidence that the breadth of their experience is all relevant in positioning themselves for leadership.
I am going to. I am a fan of Nancy Pelosi's style, and I will watch her even more closely now. I
also love her orange Max Mara coat. I ordered one when I saw it.
There is that. I think women have such a wonderful advantage to speak with clothing. And that's a whole different conversation. But as we just saw at the inauguration, the statements that women can make with what they choose to wear, in addition to what they choose to say, I think people can easily sort of dismiss it as just fashion. But the story that sticks out to me the most about that is Madeleine Albright's pin collection. And she's written an entire book about it, like a coffee table book with these beautiful pins. And she makes some statements. She would make statements with the pins that she wore, very political statements, very strong statements, sometimes middle fingers to the people that she was meeting with based on her pins. And I think that's such a lovely ability that we women have.
I agree with you, and I'm loving watching it. I mean, the inauguration was, to me, remarkably inspiring on many, many levels, but I also just loved watching what everybody was wearing. It was very intentional, the kinds of statements they were making.
Yes, very much. So my final question for you, given all that you have accomplished, which is so much, what do you still want to accomplish?
Well, I do want to write this next book. I do want to be able to develop a training program and have the bones in place for a leadership workshop on that book earlier in the process than I usually do. With How Women Rise, really having the workshop took me about 7 or 8 months to really figure it out. So I want to do that. I'm challenging myself to kind of have that ready when the book comes out, because for me, it's the way of having impact. So that's number one. I would like to, after that, I see that kind of as my last book in this series I've been writing about leadership since 1990. It will be, I believe, my 9th book in that. So I think that that's good enough. And I would probably like to write a memoir, because I've had a very rich, satisfying career and done a lot of things. And my path was extremely unusual, how I got to where I got, not like most of my colleagues. And so I'd really like to do that. I feel like I've been a witness to so much in my life. So I'd love to be in about 6 years or so in the position where I was working on that.
Oh, that's so wonderful. I will look forward to having a conversation with you about that when it happens.
Thank you.
When people want to connect with you, we mentioned LinkedIn, and you have a wonderful feed on LinkedIn. Where else can people reach you?
Well, LinkedIn is the best for social media. I mean, I do post in the others, but I'm not really actively involved with them. I focus on LinkedIn because it's so positive. People say great things about each other, and I really like that. But also my website, Sally@sallyhelgesen.com. I get lots of email through that. It's got a contact button, so I'm very easily reached that way.
Perfect. And we'll post all your contact information in the show notes when this podcast episode is published. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the Align Women podcast. It has been an absolute delight and an honor to have you as a guest.
Thank you, Amy. I've enjoyed every minute.
And look for more amazing conversations with more amazing women at alignwomenpodcast.com. Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Align Women podcast. You can find more episodes with more amazing women at alignwomenpodcast.com and visit alignwomen.org to learn more about our leadership and networking organization. This is Amy Evans, and you've been listening to the Align Women podcast.